Spartacus, the saga of the man who broke his chains. It was an era when the iron grip of the Roman Empire held Europe in a tight embrace, an age when behind the glorious splendor of the mighty empire, thousands of people groaned in the chains of slavery. The year was 73 BC, and in the city of Capua in southern Italy, the gladiatorial school was steeped in blood and sweat. The purpose of these schools was to train warriors for gladiatorial combat, one of the most primitive and brutal forms of entertainment for the Romans. Yet, within this dark and savage circle, a man would emerge whose name would echo through the centuries as a symbol of the quest for freedom, forever changing the course of history: Spartacus. Spartacus was a Thracian warrior. He had been torn from his cold and rugged homeland of Thrace, stripped of his freedom, and forced to risk his life in the arena as a gladiator. In his own country, he might have been a shepherd, a soldier, or a simple farmer, but Rome's relentless ambition for expansion had turned him into a commodity in the slave market. The environment of the ludus, gladiatorial school, in Capua was a hell designed to crush the human spirit. Every day, under the savage applause of the arenas, he would either kill another gladiator or be killed himself. Training was brutal, food was scarce, and the slightest disobedience was punished with whips. However, in Spartacus's eyes, there was not only the despair of a slave, but also a burning fire of resistance. Instead of submitting to the brutal laws of the arena, he dreamed of breaking his chains and once again feeling the free wind of his native lands. In the Capua gladiatorial school, Spartacus was not alone. Around him were thousands of slaves who shared his fate, all thirsting for freedom. Celts, Gauls, Thracians, Germans, all crushed under Rome's overwhelming power, torn from their lands and stripped of their human dignity. The prosperity of the Roman Empire relied heavily on the labor of these enslaved people. In mines, on vast estates, latifundia, in urban construction projects, and even in the homes of Rome's noble families, slaves were forced to perform all kinds of heavy labor. To Roman citizens, they were merely property, no different from talking tools. Spartacus saw the desperation and anger in the eyes of his comrades. He felt within him the power to unite them, to forge them into a single fist, and to tear away the fragile veneer from Rome's surface. One summer day, sparks flew in the Capua gladiatorial school. Under the unbearable tension caused by the tortures inflicted by the school's head trainer, Lentulus Badiatus, and the constant threat of death, approximately 70 gladiators, led by Spartacus, took their first dangerous step towards freedom, with nothing but a few small knives, some kitchen utensils, and pieces of captured armor. In a sudden raid, they broke down the school's doors, overpowered the stunned guards, and scattered into the crowded streets of Capua. A brief panic swept through the city. Amidst the chaos, they had but one goal: to escape the Roman yoke. They plundered supply wagons they encountered along the way, thus acquiring their first food and perhaps a few crude weapons. This initial escape brought unexpected success. The gladiators sought refuge on the slopes of nearby Mount Vesuvius. The mountain's steep and rugged slopes served as a natural fortress for them. It was a difficult place to reach, but easy to defend. Soon, news spread. Thousands of slaves working on surrounding farms, toiling in mines, and serving in homes heard of Spartacus's revolt. These people, fed up with Rome's cruel masters and endless oppression, heard Spartacus's name whispered like a beacon of hope and flocked to join him. Day by day, Spartacus's army grew. They were not only 70, but in a few months they had grown into an army exceeding 70,000. This was transforming into a force Rome could not ignore. Rome initially did not take this situation seriously. They underestimated this rebellion, started by a few gladiators, viewing it as a mere band of brigands. However, Spartacus would prove to be not just a gladiator, but also a skilled strategist and a charismatic leader. In the first clash on Vesuvius, he defeated a small Roman army sent to quell them with a surprising tactic. The gladiators trapped the army of the Roman commander Gaius Claudius Glaber. From the mountain slopes, Spartacus and his men, using ropes made from wild vines, rappelled down the steep cliffs, catching the Romans off guard. Glaber's army panicked, and Rome's first defeat came at the hands of slaves. This victory instilled incredible morale and courage in Spartacus's army. They were no longer just fugitives. They were a real army challenging the might of Rome. Spartacus armed his soldiers using the Roman weapons and armor they had captured. Slaves were now fighting against their masters with their masters' own weapons. Under Spartacus's leadership, the army quickly became organized. Experienced gladiators taught the other slaves how to fight, form up, and engage in disciplined combat. Swords, spears, shields. They grew stronger with each passing day. The Roman Empire was profoundly shocked when it realized the scale of this rebellion. The Senate began to send larger forces to crush Spartacus's revolt. Experienced generals like Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus, who held consular rank, pursued Spartacus with their powerful legions. However, Spartacus continued to develop ingenious tactics even against Rome's disciplined legions. Raids, ambushes, and guerrilla warfare. Spartacus's army consisted of men unaccustomed to Roman military discipline, but burning with the fire of freedom. They had nothing to lose, which made them even more dangerous. For a slave, freedom was more valuable than life itself. This gave them a motivation that the Romans could never possess. In 72 BC, Spartacus's army successively defeated the legions of powerful Roman commanders. First, they vanquished Lentulus Clodianus, then Gellius Publicola. Rome's prestige was severely shaken. It was especially unacceptable for Rome to suffer such great humiliation on its own soil at the hands of slaves. Spartacus was no longer just a slave rebellion. He was a dagger plunged into the heart of Rome. He was striking at the very lifeline of Rome's philosophy of dominance, its understanding of people as mere property. Spartacus's aim was to liberate the slaves and lead them to a safe place. He had two main plans: to cross from Italy to Sicily, or to reach the lands of the Gauls via the Alps. As his army advanced through Italy, they liberated slaves wherever they went, plundering Rome's rich farms and cities. This situation had become a great shame and threat for Rome. However, Spartacus took care to distribute the plundered wealth fairly. Instead of establishing a luxurious life for himself, he thought of the needs of his comrades. although Rome's propaganda machine depicted him as a savage barbarian. A certain order and sense of justice prevailed even within Spartacus's army. However, as Spartacus's army achieved victories, it grew, but it also became more heterogeneous. It included gladiators, peasants, shepherds, urban slaves, and all kinds of oppressed people. This sometimes led to disciplinary problems and differing objectives. Gladiators and former warriors preferred a more organized army discipline, while other slaves often had an anarchistic understanding of freedom. Some wanted to leave Italy and return to their homelands, while others preferred to fight Rome to the very end and overthrow Rome entirely. In particular,
A group led by a Gallic gladiator named Crixus, separated from Spartacus, directly clashed with the Roman army and suffered heavy losses in defeat. Spartacus made great efforts to keep these diverse groups united and focused on a single goal, but this was a constant test of his leadership. Winter was approaching, and Spartacus's army had reached the southmost tip of Italy, the Strait of Messina. Their goal was to cross to Sicily. They made an agreement with pirates and planned to cross by ship. The pirates promised to provide transport for 2,000 slaves. However, the pirates, bribed by Rome, betrayed Spartacus and did not send the promised ships. Spartacus and his army were trapped once again. They were cornered on the narrow coast of the strait. Meanwhile, Rome had mobilized all its might to definitively crush this rebellion. The Senate assigned one of its most capable and ruthless commanders, Marcus Licinius Crassus, to the task. Crassus was one of Rome's wealthiest men and known for his ambition. Defeating Spartacus meant both glory and political power for him. Crassus wanted to secure his rise by crushing this rebellion. Crassus pursued Spartacus with 8 legions, a colossal army of about 40,000 men. He enforced strict discipline within his army. To prevent his soldiers from fleeing, he resorted to brutal punishments, such as decimation, or decimatio. He had 1 out of every 10 soldiers chosen by lot and executed. This horrific practice increased his army's motivation to fight and their obedience to Crassus. To corner Spartacus, he built a large ditch and wall system, extending approximately 55 kilometers from sea to sea in Calabria at the southern tip of Italy. His aim was to completely cut off Spartacus's escape route to Sicily or anywhere else. Spartacus and his men realized they were caught in Crassus's trap. In desperation, in the freezing cold of winter, they tried to cross this massive wall Crassus had built. Roman sources state that Spartacus made an incredible effort to overcome this wall. Some accounts even mention that they cut animals and used their internal organs to create bridges to cross the wall. They suffered thousands of casualties, dying from freezing or Roman attacks, but under Spartacus's leadership, some managed to get through the wall and escape Crassus's encirclement. In the spring of 71 BC, Spartacus's and Crassus's armies met on the banks of the Seler River near Lucania. This would be the final and bloodiest clash between the slaves seeking freedom and the legions symbolizing the might of the Roman Empire. Spartacus felt his army beginning to disintegrate. News arrived that Rome's other important commanders, Pompey and Lucullus, were also approaching. Spartacus now faced the risk of being caught between 3 powerful Roman armies. Spartacus, in a final desperate move, gathered all his strength and advanced on Crassus. With the courage inherited from his gladiator past, he fought in the front lines. Killing his horse and fighting on foot signified either victory or death. His goal was to find and kill Crassus and thus end the war. Swinging his sword, he plunged into the midst of Roman legions. He was engaged in a relentless struggle with Rome's elite soldiers. However, against Rome's disciplined and numerous legions, Spartacus's army could no longer resist. Outnumbered and outmatched, the Romans encircled the slave army. Although ancient sources describe Spartacus's last moments differently, most state that Spartacus fought bravely and was eventually killed by Roman soldiers. According to Appian, Spartacus was wounded by 2 centurions while trying to reach Crassus, but he continued to fight and finally fell upon his enemies. His body was not found on the battlefield.
Perhaps it was deliberately hidden to prevent Rome from proving his death, or it was lost in the chaos of battle. This only further strengthened the legend of Spartacus. With Spartacus's death, the slave rebellion was completely crushed. Crassus gained great fame from this victory. But Rome's revenge was merciless. Approximately 6,000 surviving slaves from Spartacus's army were crucified along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome. Every few meters, a human body hung from a cross. This horrific sight served as a warning against future slave revolts. Rome wanted to demonstrate its power and ruthlessness to the whole world, to terrify the slaves to never rebel again. Although Spartacus's rebellion was suppressed, its impact left deep marks on the Roman Empire. This revolt exposed how fragile Rome's system of slavery truly was. Rome had to be more cautious with its slaves, and considered some reforms in the system of slavery, though the institution of slavery fundamentally remained unchanged. However, Spartacus's story became a symbol of freedom and resistance for centuries. It became a source of inspiration not only for slaves, but for all oppressed peoples. His name transformed into a legend that shook the Roman Empire, broke chains, and represented the purest form of human dignity. Spartacus's rebellion was far more than a simple slave revolt. It was an epic of human dignity, the quest for freedom, and the resistance of the oppressed. His name continued to shine as a beacon of hope in the heart of every people and every individual, fighting against oppression. He was the man who broke his chains, and even thousands of years later, his echoes continued to be heard around the world. For Spartacus's story teaches us never to give up, to fight for freedom, and to preserve human dignity. His legacy lives on, not just in history books, but in the spirit of resistance and freedom itself.